All right. So we've had a lot of information come in from Syria about the fact that the Assad regime has actually fallen and it has been taken over. The capital has been taken over by the rebel fighters. A lot of questions coming out of all of this. Is it a good thing? Was Assad a good guy or a bad guy? And who's going to take over after him? Are they good guys or bad guys? That's what we're going to attempt to sort of break down in this video and take you through what has happened so far. And then you can decide whether you want to be happy about it or slightly worried about it. We'll also take a look at the reactions from the rest of the world and the reactions from the people of Syria. So I'm going to start by sharing my screen. There you are. I'm going to start by taking you to this particular article. Now, I'm using a lot of Al Jazeera on this story. It basically talks about opposition fighters, and this was on the 8th of December, declaring Syria's Damascus as liberated and sort of removing Assad altogether. Now, I want to remind you that Bashar al-Assad has been running Syria for 24 years. Out of those 24 years, at least 13 years have been spent in armed conflict with the rebellion group, or what you'll hear a lot of the news guys call them rebels. They were military rebels. So it was effectively a civil war that lasted more than a decade, where Assad was actually at war with his own people. And there were pockets of the country, portions of the country that had actually been taken over by rebels. So rebels were controlling a portion of it, and Assad was controlling a portion of it. So the regime, he was being referred to as the regime, was controlling a portion of it. So in this story, you can see that the leader of the rebel group actually put out a statement saying the city of Damascus has been liberated, the tyrant has been toppled, the prisoners have been released. And, this was a statement that was effectively put out by the leader of the fighters. And also there was a statement that later came from the Russian Foreign Ministry that effectively said that Assad has resigned and that he had left Syria. Now, on the 8th of December, they had not specified where he's gone, but we've learned since then that he and his family are, in fact, in Russia. Now, Assad had a prime minister, a Syrian, he was president, he had a Syrian prime minister called Mohammad Ghazi al-Jalali. Now, al-Jalali has stayed back. He put out a statement saying that I am not leaving, Syria is my country, and he continues to run a sort of transitional government where he will look after the handing over of power to whoever's going to take over. Now, who's going to take over? That's the question. The leader of the main fighting group is called the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, and I'll take you through who these people are. Their leader is one Abu Muhammad al-Julani. He's the one who put out that statement that I was telling you about, and he's likely to take over, and we'll go through who he is and what his sort of legacy is as well. He's asked the fighters at this point not to attack any public institution or any service. They have, though, ransacked the president, Assad's house, walked away with a lot of his Louis Vuitton and his designer luxuries. They found luxury cars in his home. They have looted effectively all the rooms. And recently I saw a video in Al Jazeera that also showed the fact that he had built a bunker under his home and with an escape route that they have also since discovered. He, of course, as you know, took an aircraft and flew out of Damascus, and then apparently we understand is in Russia. There was some question in the middle about whether or not his aircraft disappeared, went off the radar, and there was some question of whether or not he was safe. We understand now that he is in fact safe. The fighters entered the heart of the capital and announced a new era. Effectively, there were celebrations of freedom. I want to show you. These are, visuals of the celebrations across Syria after Assad fell. There's an interesting visual I also saw. Normally, when there's a change of regime, something like this happens, people flee. And there's always a visual of a giant traffic jam of people actually leaving the city. Now there are visuals of people coming back. after Assad has fallen, because of the conflict and because of the rebellion, there were people who were forced to leave their homes. Some of them went to Turkey, some of them went to the rebel controlled portions of the state. They are now coming back to their homes for the first time. And as you can see, visuals of people who had joined the rebellion, who are now saying they finally get to go home to their neighborhoods. And if you look at this visual here, you'll see the background is what I want to draw your attention to. The city of Damascus is an ancient city, completely in ruin because of the fighting that has happened. Remember, Russia, Assad had the support of Hezbollah and he had the support of Russia. And that resulted in, and Israel has been attacking Damascus as well. There are 25 locations that Israel has targeted over the last 24 hours after Assad has fallen. So these are visuals right now. We're looking at people who are actually celebrating the fact that the Assad regime has finally ended. Here, I can't play the video because of copyright, but you can see what had happened. Effectively, that statue that you're looking at is of Assad's father, the previous president, Hafiz al-Assad. Between Hafiz al-Assad and the current Assad, Bashar Assad, they've actually run the country for, I think, 50 odd years. And you can see that statue was toppled and dragged through the streets where people rode on top of it. The other visual that came out, and this was a big one. Remember, he's the leader of the rebels said that we have freed the prisoners. There is one prison in Damascus, or the outskirts of Damascus, that was actually called a human slaughterhouse. Now, reports say that there are about 100,000 people who were picked up and taken to these prisons. A lot of them political prisoners. Nobody's heard from them since. The visuals that are now emerging are of the rebel fighters going into these prisons and actually releasing people. There's one prison which was a prison of women, and you can see that visual of that little boy. Apparently, he was one of the children of the prisoners who've been in prison for 4 or 5 years now. Those women were actually released. There were some men who were going to be executed on the day they were released. There was one report that said 54 people were going to be executed on the day they were released, and it was just sheer luck that they were, released on that day. The other half of the visual that you see on the left, according to Al Jazeera's report, is of a man who could not tell the people who came to rescue him what his name was or where his family was or anything about himself. And they released that visual saying hopefully the family will actually see who he is and recognize him and come to claim him. So now the question that we have to ask now is, who is Bashar al-Assad, and why is it that his ousting in this manner has resulted in this much celebration? So that's the visual on your screen. I'm reading out of a CNN article, and I'll towards the end of this, I'll tell you why we need to have some perspective also when we're reading Western media and not take everything at face value of either side. So we started off reading Al Jazeera, now we're reading CNN. We're going to read both sides, and we're going to try and figure out really for ourselves what's going on. Now, Bashar al-Assad is the second generation of the family. I told you this country was being run by his father, who was a rags to riches story, who took over in 1970 and was a tyrant also from all reports. And now then his son took over after him. So Assad took power unopposed in 2000 following the death of his father, who rose from poverty in 1970. Now, actually, when Assad took over, he was actually studying to be a surgeon in England, in London. So when he took over, everybody expected that since he was Western educated, that he would be a more liberal and not be the tyrant that his father was. But he quickly then disappointed everyone. He actually had an older brother who was going to take over, so it was not really he was not really the one who had to take over, but his older brother passed away, and he was then required to step up. Now remember, Hafiz al-Assad was also an oppressor. He did not allow any sort of dissent at all. In fact, in 1982, in the city of Hama, and this is out of the CNN article that I'm reading for you, the Assad army and intelligence services slaughtered thousands of opponents ending in an uprising led by the Muslim Brotherhood. So this has been a pattern of not allowing any sort of dissent at all. Like I said, Assad was studying ophthalmology in London. His older brother Basil was supposed to succeed, but he died in a car crash. And then, Bashar al-Assad was called in to the spotlight, and he became a colonel in the Syrian army. And after his father's death in June 2000, he took over. And they had to apparently change the law in the country to allow him to take over, because he was 34 years old at that time, and he didn't match the requirement of 40, which was the minimum age to become president. So they changed the law to allow him to become president. At that time, like I said, in Europe and in the US, everybody thought he was young. He was being educated in the West. He would be different. He was married to an investment banker who had grown up in London. So people expected them to have that sort of modern Western point of view, but they didn't, because he quickly took on the role that his father had without much change. And he maintained also traditional ties with Hamas and with Hezbollah. Hezbollah has supported him till the very end, and that sort of disappointed a lot of people. In May 2011, Barack Obama, when he was the president of the United States, said the Assad regime had chosen a path of murder and mass arrests of its citizens, and called on him to have a democratic transition or to simply get out of the way. Now, what had happened actually was Assad had a re-election, and he'd been re-elected by sweeping majorities every 7 years, but those elections were fraudulent, according to the US, the UK, France, Germany, and Italy. That they were not really democratic elections, and he was just finding ways to give himself power and crushing all dissent, which led to then a civil war, which was a civil war that we've seen play out this entire time. Now, you'll remember there was an Arab uprising, right? So in 2011, there were pro-democratic protests that started off. In 2013, the UN inspectors said that there was, and I'm quoting, overwhelming and indisputable evidence of Assad using nerve gas against his own people. At that point, the UN Secretary General actually described in a report the worst use of weapons of mass destruction in the 21st century by Assad on his own people. The United States said that attack killed more than 1,400 people, including civilians, including children, apparently, as well. So Assad had also warned Western nations against supporting rebel groups and battling his armed forces, predicting that the militants one day would strike the US and others. And this went on. And it is that sort of uprising that we've seen finally culminate in this takeover, right? The question then to ask is, why is it that the Assad regime that was able to hold down these rebels for 13 years collapse now so quickly? Now, effectively, the answer that we're getting from a lot of reports is that the army that Assad had was hollowed out by that 14-year war, that, a large portion of Syria's population had been displaced. Like I told you, they're now coming back. The country's economy and infrastructure was devastated. Again, remember that visual I showed you of complete devastation in the background. Apparently, a large portion of the people were living in poverty. And so nothing was really working anymore, including we understand the armed forces that reported to the regime sort of just keeled over after a point. And some of them apparently have joined rebel forces, and some of them just laid down their arms at that point. In the war's early years, and this is France 24, experts say a combination of casualties, defections, and draft dodging saw the military lose about half of its force. And as we see, the allies were also weakened and distracted. The two major allies at this point were Russia and Iran. Russia is currently, as you know, preoccupied with its own war in Ukraine. Iran has been preoccupied as well because, and its allied group, huge setbacks because of their conflict with Israel, and that being, that taking up a lot of that attention. Hezbollah, out of action. Hezbollah has openly backed, Assad up till now, but because of what's happening between Israel and Hezbollah, they've not really had the bandwidth to come in and support. And as a result, and of course, Israel played a large role in toppling this regime. As a result, we've seen what we have seen. Now we had the information come out that Assad is in fact in Moscow, that he left the country, and he's currently taken asylum in Russia. Russia has given him asylum. Now that brings us to the next question. What happens next? Assad was a man who attacked his own people. He was undemocratic. He attacked them with nerve gas. He attacked them with chemical weapons. He's imprisoned people. The people who have been imprisoned, there have been constant reports of torture, of starvation, of the worst kinds of atrocities and human rights violations that have taken place. This was not a good man. He personally lived in luxury while his people starved, and he's been overthrown. But the question is, by whom, and what is likely to happen next? And that's an important thing to consider as well. Now, the main fighters are the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, and they are an offshoot of Al-Qaeda. They are the Syrian arm of Al-Qaeda. And the leader, the Al-Jalani, who I was telling you about, used to be an Al-Qaeda fighter himself. So that's the question now that everybody's sort of asking, because what does this mean if these are the people who take over? Now, 42-year-old Syrian fighter, you could call him militant, you could call him freedom fighter. Depends on which side of the glass you're looking at it, really. For most of the Western world, he's a militant and a jihadist because he's been part of Al-Qaeda, he's been part of ISIS. For the people of Syria right now who are celebrating in the streets, he's their fighter, he's their freedom fighter. Now, he founded the Al-Nusra Front, which is the Syrian branch of Al-Qaeda that actually led a lot of this fighting. He's also got, links, like we're looking at in this Hindustan Times article, with ISIS. Now, what happens when people like this take over? And we've seen in similar sort of collapses of regimes and taking over of fighters. Take, for example, the Taliban and what they're doing in Afghanistan right now, where women are now being denied all forms of education. They can't practice any sort of profession. It's led to an even worse violation of human rights than earlier. And at this point, see, Jolan, the question is that where does this leave the UN? Does the UN have any ability to stand up for the rights of people if the rights of people are violated? And what would that mean? And that's really the big question to ask at this point. The other point, and remember I told you earlier, we will discuss, and I'll just like leave these visuals here. We will discuss the flip side of both kinds of media coverage, right? Let me just come back to you. So see, on one hand, you'll see, and we've sort of come to terms with the fact that the Western media is not the most reliable, because we're looking at how it's covering, the conflict or the war in Gaza, where it has a very blinkered point of view to what it is going to cover. And it's not a credible way to cover a conflict. It's a very Western view and a very racist white view of covering a conflict. Now, I just want to place this in front of you. On one hand, when the Western media refers to Hamas, they refer to them as a militant and armed militant group, as terrorists, effectively. But they're not applying that same vocabulary when they are discussing these rebel, they're calling them militant fighters. They're not calling them terrorists. They're rebel fighters. And somehow the vocabulary is different at this point for different countries and the different kind of coverage. So, on one hand, while they have not supported Hamas and they see Hamas as a very bad thing, on this hand, on the other side, I want to tell you what the United States has said. The US President Joe Biden has said, and I'm quoting, "At long last, the Assad regime has fallen, calling for a downfall of the fundamental act of justice. The European Union has said," and I'm quoting, "this historic change in the region offers opportunities, but not without risks." Similar sort of thing has happened in Germany. Germany has said tens of thousands of lives are on Assad's conscience. France has said Assad's regime was a barbaric state and expressed relief that it has fallen. Poland has given a similar. The United Kingdom, the Syrian people have suffered under Assad's barbaric regime for too long, and we welcome his departure. So there's a lot of celebration across the Western world of the fact that Assad has fallen. What will he be replaced with, and what are the dangers of that? Of that being replaced. And remember, if this is an individual who has links to Al Qaeda and to ISIS, which we understand is America's main enemy, then how come America is not seeming more cautious about the fact that these are the individuals who are likely to take over in Syria? Remember, Syria has a lot of oil, and I just want to put all of these cards on the table when we're reading the news that's coming from either one side. So if you're reading it coming from Al Jazeera, or which largely is a Central Asian point of view, because it's a organization that's run out of Qatar, and if you're reading Western media, so if you're reading BBC and CNN, then keep that perspective in as well. The question is, how will this play out in Syria? Remember, Syria also has religious minorities. There is a Catholic population or Christian population, because Syria is very close to Jordan, it's very close to Jerusalem, and so it has an ancient Christian population. What happens there? Is ISIS likely to play a larger role, or is the Islamic State likely to play a larger role in what's going to happen in Syria? Also, there are the Kurdish groups and fighters from a northern part of Syria that don't really, I mean, they've all come together to throw off Assad, but will they stay together, even after this? That's another question to ask. What will happen to the rights of minorities? What will happen to the rights of women? And all of these questions will only likely play out. My only point here is, while you're information you see the side of, apply a little bit of perspective as to what those motives are and how each story is being colored this way or that way, to decide for yourself what you really want to believe. Remember, if you find this useful, like, share, subscribe, and let us know in the comment section if there are any other such stories you'd like us to take up on this breakdown and explainer format. Thank you for watching.